Hi everyone, this is Karen with the Runner's Edge with another installment of some rugby chats with some awesome people in the rugby community. I'm really excited today. I have a good friend and a rugby colleague, Justin Goonan, who is joining us. He is a current he's a coach with Indiana University, so definitely tied in with the college side. He's also the owner and operator of Universal Sports Strength and Conditioning. And also, I didn't even know this. He's just doing so much. I don't know when you have time to sleep. He's also the head of athlete performance for USA Touch, and he's just about to head out to Malaysia with that team. So good luck to the U.S. team in that competition. Is there anything else you want to add for people who maybe never met you? Oh, one other thing. The reason I met Justin many, many years ago was he was doing all the strength and conditioning for the age grade program. So in doing my academic work with high school Americans, I think that was probably maybe the first time our paths crossed. And it's been awesome to kind of stay in touch with you. And I'm so thankful for the time you're taking today to chat with me. So yeah, I mean, these are pretty casual, but I thought I would kick us off. One of the things, oftentimes when I work with student athletes, one of the big things that always comes up is, so beside my practices on Tuesdays and Thursdays and a game on Saturday, what else should I be doing? And what I typically see is a student might say, well, on my off days, I go run 2 miles and then I run home. And you're like, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that's okay. But I don't know. What are some things in your years of experience, working obviously with the high school side and then also with the college side? What are some tips or some things you've observed that you kind of want to share with, the rugby community?
Yeah, no, I mean, first and foremost, Karen, thank you very much for the invitation. Like you said, I mean, you and I have had a chance to know one another and follow each other's, kind of journeys over the last few years. And it's been exciting to see how much, how much you've grown and Runner's Edge has grown. And of course, I love the success stories, about the athletes that you help and kind of where they've had the chance to go. So, so congrats to you as well. I'd say in terms of high school and even college athletes that I've interacted with, if I narrowed it down to one thing, and it's still a broad topic, I would say it's recovery, or lack thereof. Like you said, on their off day, hey, coach, I go to the weight room or I go for a long run. That might be the one day a week that they don't have practice or a game or workout scheduled with their high school team or whatever. And they kind of feel like, well, I need to keep doing stuff. And the more I do, the bigger return I'm going to get. As I kind of tell our college guys is sometimes doing less can actually get you more because your body's in a better position for it. And so, it was funny last week, our type 5 players who are not playing sevens right now, I sent out a yoga video. And said, here's your goal, here's your task, your homework for the day. Of course, there were some smirks and some comments and some giggles at first, but some of the comments that came back afterwards, from some of our bigger guys that, they said, wow, like I feel so bad that I actually joked about yoga for so long because it feels so good. So yeah, I would say probably the number one thing is recovery. Like I said, it's a pretty broad topic, whether you're talking supplements or sleep or, I mean, any spectrum of whatever you consider recovery to be. I'd say that's probably the one thing that's overlooked and definitely underutilized.
Yeah, I mean, I think something that is interesting that you touch, the fact that you even say sleep. I mean, obviously, because I'm working with high school athletes and a lot of them have big dreams, right? And I love it. I'm like, yes, like let's shoot for the stars and let's look at these, potentially very competitive college, like the colleges themselves are very difficult and also the rugby program. And you'll see, I got a text last night from a student who had finished an essay because he was doing a scholarship essay. And I got it at 1 a.m. Mountain Time, which meant that was midnight his time because he's in California. I'm like, why are you doing an essay at midnight on, on a Thursday? you have school the next day, or, you have a game on Saturday. And I think sleep is an interesting, topic, just because I think most students, like you just said, it says go, go, go. Like, I want to make the national team, or I want to, do X, Y, and Z, which means I just have to do more. I mean, when you're on tour, and a question for you, because I think you've been on tours with a lot of these players, like, what is something, like, what would you say a typical, let's say we're at a tournament, right? I mean, are there times within a tournament that you would see recovery even within, like a tournament setting? Does that make sense? Like, it's not like, I don't know, like, I feel like high school players have a different version of how, like, even if they're playing like regional cup tournaments are coming up, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a big deal for a lot of players. That's where they're going to get seen for possible high school All-American selection and things like that. What would you maybe recommend maybe that some players include into, kind of their process of maybe a big tournament like that? So either from a kind of a maintenance piece, performance, or also, recovery.
Yeah, no, great question. And this might be creating or opening a whole new rabbit hole, but
yeah,
when I'm talking to our players, whether it's, here at Indiana or on tours, it's about recovery within different times, right? So you're going to recover from play to play. You're going to recover from game to game. You're going to recover from day to day, week to week, so forth and so on, right? So there's all different ways that they should really kind of look at recovery. And as you said, in those tournament environments specifically, it's really about like you said, have a process and really set a schedule. So prime example, like you said, I'm going to the World Cup next week with USA Touch. There's 7 teams that are going to be competing. 7 teams represent the USA that are competing. Well, there's only one of me, so I can't be with all 7 teams every minute of every day or with every game. And so what we've done is created kind of, I call them scripts, but essentially they're schedules of, this is what each team should be doing at each, within 20 minutes before kickoff, 10 minutes before kickoff. As soon as the final whistle blows, here's what you're doing 5 minutes after, here's what you're doing 10 minutes after, so forth and so on.
And what does that look like? I'm just giving an example. I'm curious, like, what would that maybe look like?
Yeah. So, well, in our halftime, I'll even say this, our halftime protocol, so to speak, it really kind of mimics, it's a very expressed version of our post game. Again, for me as a strength conditioning performance specialist, halftime, there's got to be some sort of recovery in there. So usually what we try and do right away is get all the athletes to just take 3 to 5 just nice, slow, deep breaths. There's been some conversations, some research coming out recently, or that I've read recently, to where nasal breathing through your nose can help kind of stimulate that recovery process. You think about halftime or even right after the game, you got one strong play, you're out of breath, you're huffing, puffing, trying to talk. That's probably the last thing you should try and do at that point. Just take a second, take 3 or 5 slow, deep breaths, clear your mind, let your body, your heart rate just kind of slow down a little bit. And then you can go into your post-game conversations. I mean, how many times do you see, at these tournaments, right, however the last play went, depending on which huddle you're watching, you see a player come in and he's still fired up and yelling and screaming. Well, the game's over. You can't do it. You got to move on to the next job. And so take those breaths, slow down, get over to your tent, or your camp area as quickly as possible. That's where we always encourage, whether it's, protein shakes or protein bars or some sort of food or nutrition, get that in as quickly as possible, especially, those tournament environments. You have a game in the morning, you've got to turn around in the afternoon. Well, depending on the facilities and the schedule, one game you might have an hour and a half between games. The next time you might have 3-4 hours between games. But the quicker you get that that nutrition in, again, whatever form it is, the better off you're going to be. And then I always, we always go through a stretch protocol. So let's take 5-10 minutes. Let's get a cool down stretch. And again, it's just focusing on breathing, slowing down the heart rate, letting the muscles relax a little bit. And then from there, like at the World Cup, for example, we're going to have the facilities that all the athletes have access to ice baths. So we always try and get them into the ice baths as quickly as possible, cool their body temperature down. In some cases you don't have access to that, and that's fine. That's where you kind of have to, deal with what you have or work with what you have.
Right.
And then, I think like at the World Cup, for example, all the athletes are encouraged to have some sort of compression gear. So they can slide into their skins or some sort of tights. Maybe it's even compression socks or maybe even upper body compartments if they need that. And then, just whatever kind of treatment they have. I mean, I know that like the RCTs, for example, not every team is able to have their own individual athletic trainer that's there. But, that's the moment that if you have any ailments, you need to get those tended to ASAP. So you've got maximum time to recover before that next match.
I mean, something that I think is funny after going to a lot of RCTs and kind of like these bigger, tournament, like actually next weekend, I'll be going to Tropical Sevens in Orlando.
Yeah.
I think there's like 100 plus, high school teams, right? So there's going to be a ton of people. And something that I often see is I think high school students are really social and they're excited to be there. And you'll see like, let's say they do play a game at 9, they're done at 10, they do their stretching. And you know what? From the time like they're done at 10 till their next game at noon, they're like walking around, they're chatting with people, they're jumping. I mean, I get it, like they have a lot of energy, but they're literally on their feet the whole time. They're like, oh, let's go see over there, let's go get food and let's go do this. And you'll see, and they're in the sun, right? So they're just out. And then by the time it's noon, I personally think there's a big difference of those teams that kind of in their off time, they're not using it wisely, right? Where I've seen other teams that maybe use that time a bit more, like where some students might look at it like, oh, maybe that student's being lazy. I actually think it's actually being very smart. They kind of find a little part of their tent in the shade. They put on headphones, like they're actually trying to either nap or just rest, like just not look at rugby, not be out in the sun. I don't know. And I don't remember if I've ever had a coach tell me, but it's just that idea of being able to reset, like you think, because a lot of them will just sit on the sideline and they'll watch the next 2 games and they're like, oh no, we got to go warm up now. And now they've just spent an extra 2 hours, either just kind of, I don't want to say goofing off because I want them to enjoy themselves, but it's just also not giving them their bodies any time to recover, like you said. I mean, do you tell that to your teams as well?
Oh, no doubt. And probably to the point that they get tired of hearing it. But no, I mean, that brings up a good point. There's also the mental recovery side of it as well, besides the physical, and as you said, for a lot of those athletes, they probably think, well, I'm just watching, and I'm not running around or anything. And to them, they think that's part of it. But as you said, they're still engaged, and I think, kind of going back to the point you made earlier about sleep, I think that's why it's been shocking to me to find out how many high school and young college students struggle with sleep. And a lot of it is they haven't really learned, the practices or routines to switch their minds off as well and get that mental recovery. So yeah, there's no doubt the mental side of it is as big, if not, some might argue, even bigger than the physical side of it.
Right. And even for, especially because you're going to tour and it's a much bigger change, but you've got players now crossing time zones and having to essentially maybe arrive and play. And I will have players that are flying from California, to Florida, maybe the night before. Like I even know I arrive at midnight the night before. If I had to play, that might be difficult, right? Or it might be different because now I'm changing time zones. Do you have advice for those players that are going to have to do things like that in the next few months of lots of travel, and what you would, maybe some tips about helping them kind of create that routine? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, that's a question that we've been getting a lot, especially getting ready for the World Cup. And I mean, we're going to be changing, I forget, I want to say Malaysia is probably 15 hours ahead, and so, yeah, it's getting that adjustment to the new time zone. For a player in California, when they go out to the tropical sevens, a 10 a.m. game is going to feel like 7 in the morning. And that's something that they don't, they might not always think about, right? And to an athlete that, maybe has, they have to go to class and then catch a flight to Florida after that. It's about making that adjustment as quickly as possible, right? So, if their flight leaves at, say, 8 o'clock Pacific time, well, they've got to think, okay, well, that's really 11 o'clock East Coast time. I need to get to sleep. I need to sleep on the plane as much as I can, because that's going to help with that adjustment. Obviously you got to deplane and get to the hotel, whatever else. Those are things you can't control. But once you get to the hotel, get to bed as quickly as you can. And I think part of that, kind of going back to your example with the tournament, when I was a huge people watcher. I know you spend a lot of time in the airports as well. And you get on the plane and what do? They put their headphones on for their music. They're playing, some sort of, game or app on their phone. And all that stuff is just stimulus that's keeping them awake. As opposed to, one of the things that some of the clients I'm working with right now, their habit to focus on is a sleep routine. And it's start 30 minutes or 30 minutes or 1 hour before your scheduled bedtime. That's when you put your phone on the charger, you shut your computer, maybe it's you take a shower, you brush your teeth, you lay out your clothes for the next day, something that helps the mind and the body just start to remember, okay, yeah, I've been here before. This is where we're going. We're getting ready to sleep. And so when you're traveling, it needs to be the same thing. That again, if I've got that, that 8 p.m. Pacific flight going to Florida, well, as soon as I get on the plane, it needs to be music off, phone away, wear the eye mask or whatever you need to start kind of tricking your body, so to speak, to thinking it's bedtime.
Right. Yeah. And a couple, when I was refereeing a lot more and traveling a lot more, I remember one of our, when we had developmental sessions and stuff, we definitely had a little kind of a little pack that they would tell you to bring, right? Because you're traveling, you're in a hotel, you're rooming with someone, you're not sure, maybe that person snores. I mean, whatever the case may be. And I learned really quickly to, this is a tip for all the students that are out there that are going to be making this travel, next week or in the coming months when they're doing NAI or any of that stuff, especially high school Americans are going to be traveling overseas. I don't go anywhere now without earplugs, with an eye mask. I've downloaded, I have a sleep app, I have Headspace that has, kind of like ambient sound, white noise or whatever, and that's what I listen to every night. So when I get to the hotel, everything feels similar. I mean, I've even had players or other referees and other people in the rugby community will even say, I always travel with my own pillow, or I always travel with certain things that remind them of home, so that their body doesn't feel like, oh wait, I'm now in a strange place and there's strange noises. Because everyone's had that experience, right? Like you're the first night's always really hard. And really that first day is pool play. That's one of the most important days. Like you got to get through that day to get to the, the finals the next day. So, awesome. So I want to switch gears a little bit. And, if we move from recovery and kind of that routine, I mean, one of the common questions I get is, if we were to think about, and I know this opens a whole other can of worms, but if we were to be broad, and then if you did want to break it down into maybe positions or things, what are some areas that you think athletes out there, high school athletes, could really focus on. So overall for rugby, athletes, instead of just the like, I run 2 miles, I don't even know what that means, but just, like a 2-mile jog doesn't necessarily really help their performance versus like, if you were to say, please add this into your fitness routine or your strength routine, what would that be? Broadly for all rugby players, and then maybe get into some positional stuff. You're like looking really excited. So yeah, what do you think?
I'm just warning myself. Let's not get too carried away with it. No, I think for me, if we were looking at a broad topic, for all athletes, all positions, especially young teenage, high school age athletes, I would probably say mobility is probably the biggest kind of blanket area. Having worked in a couple of different college environments, and very fortunate when I was in Alabama. I know you and I were working very closely at that point. Actually, you were teaming up with my wife for a little bit.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to work not just with rugby, but with every NCAA sport at the school. And I've got players, baseball, basketball, soccer players coming in, and they're so quick to tell me how much they do with this lift or that lift or how fast they run, and I'm like, okay, that's fine. But show me. And majority of the time, whenever they did it, I would cringe because their technique was just so frightening. And it's not to say that their technique was it was definitely a risk, but a lot of the technical failures came to a lack of mobility or movement in certain areas of the body. And so I think especially today, as they call it, kind of the days of instant feedback or instant, information. It's so quick that, and of course I've had this before too. Hey coach, I saw this cool exercise on Instagram. Well, that's great, but you don't know how it fits into our program, and you're doing this because this person, look cool doing it, but you don't know how it fits into their program, or you don't know all the things they did leading up to be able to do that. So definitely taking some time to really work in, some committed, dedicated mobility, right? It's no different than you go to line-out practice. Well, the first thing you do is a hooker focuses on his throws. The jumpers focus on their jumps. They don't just go straight into, group line-outs. And so that's why, especially with my workouts, it's usually the first 10 to 15 minutes is focused on mobility and kind of some of those smaller, I guess you'd say, trouble areas that majority of the athletes are going to struggle with. Once we get into positions, I know front rowers struggle a lot with ankle mobility. And I've had a lot of coaches, a lot of scrum coaches, but especially, some very good strength conditioning coaches who will say that, when you see a prop get out of position, maybe their hips get too high or their chest drops, a lot of rugby coaches might look at it and say, well, you need to lift your chest. But, a good friend of mine, Ed Costner, legendary strength coach, he can look at it and spot it. Of course, his powerlifting background, he's watched so many athletes and so many levels squat that he can say, well, no, he can't get into that position because he's got no flexibility in his ankle or no mobility in his ankle.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of, as I heard Coach Gold say one time, you got to treat, you can't treat the, oh gosh, I'm going to mix this up. But anyways, treating the symptom versus the virus, that the picture is the chest is dropping, but you're not looking at the root cause of it. Second rowers, I'd say is probably struggle with the same. Of course, the typical lock is going to be a longer athlete. And actually saw some of our guys practicing the other day. I think it's trunk stability. And this is, at one point I said, my sole professional goal is to eliminate sit-ups. Sit-ups or crunches. And had a debate with some players a couple of weeks ago. And I said, all right, had them in a standing position. I said, demonstrate what a crunch would look like from this position. And of course, they hunch over. I said, all right, now, at what point in any game would a coach ever tell you to be like that? And they're like, well, it's like, okay. So, second rowers, I mean, they're so long and tall to begin with, that especially in a scrum, once they get extended, if they don't have the strength or the control to keep everything stable, they can start to collapse, especially under the pressure of the scrum. Back row is probably a little bit of the same. I mean, of course, these are all issues that, from 1 to 15 or 1 to 23, you're going to see similar issues. I think in the backs especially, it's probably hip mobility. When you look at some of the younger or newer athletes, whenever they're trying to make lateral movements or changes of direction, they try and sink down, or they don't have the mobility nor the control. That's why, we always say they're kind of chopping their steps, because they need those smaller, shorter steps in order to gain control before they can change direction. But when you look at some of the top athletes who, have some of the best side steps and everything, they have that mobility and that stability within that midsection to do that.
So I know you're sitting, so it's hard to tell, but so two things you've mentioned. So obviously mobility in the hips, mobility in the ankles. Is that something where literally, and I'm making this up, is this something where if I'm a prop and I'm sitting at home, I should probably work on that? Is that an exercise you do, or is it I literally don't even know, how would you increase ankle mobility for a prop, I guess? Is there something you're sitting there and you're just moving your feet? What would that look like?
Yeah, no, it's, oh gosh. I mean, it's probably a better question for a physical therapist or athletic trainer. I mean, there are certainly, as I mentioned, in the workouts that I prescribe, I mean, we certainly do have some ankle mobility exercises that kind of address that. Probably the easiest one without really demonstrating it is, I always have athletes stand close to a wall and emphasize keeping your heel as flat as you can, and then, moving and bending your knee towards the wall as far as you can, while keeping your heel on the ground. Some athletes, they might struggle to get their knee in line with their toes. That's probably a clear sign of having, having some flexibility issues there. Others, and, I know I'm kind of a unique case, they have no problem getting their knee beyond their toes. And then it's just about, being able to maintain that. So that's one simple one. They'll definitely start to feel a stretch through the back of their leg, back of their calf, through their Achilles. That's probably the easiest one. I said, a physical therapist or athletic trainer probably has, they've probably forgotten more exercises than I know for that kind of stuff. But no, you're exactly right. Just like we said with recovery and weight workouts and everything else, flexible, that's stuff that you have to schedule in and really commit and dedicate time to.
So I had one last question I really was excited to ask you is, because you've kind of seen the progression of high school athlete to college and then beyond, right? You've really kind of seen even potentially one player that's kind of gone through the whole process. If you were to jump ahead, 10 years, you've kind of seen where it's going. I mean, where do you think, I guess, the rugby athleticism is going, if that makes sense? I feel like when I started playing, this is in 1997, I felt like when you were to watch rugby or when you're to play, it was, you had your standard, well, those are the big, slow people. They're in the forwards, and your fast people are in the backs. And even as you mentioned, there's certainly some very common maybe builds for certain positions, but I feel like as I'm watching it grow, some of those things are maybe slipping away. It's hard to tell if someone's really a hooker, or maybe they are a wing, or I've seen really big scrum halves. I don't know. I'm curious where you think, as rugby is continuing to grow from that performance side, the strength and conditioning side, and especially I have lots of high school coaches that also, check into to Rutgers Edge and things like that. What are some things you might, bring up for them to kind of start being on the forefront of, instead of continuing to, I don't know, stay with the old mindset of what rugby looks like?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Gosh, I wouldn't even know where to start. I mean, you're exactly right. Especially when I got introduced to the game, there certainly were very distinct body types, right? And it's interesting. I had a conversation with a coach a couple of months ago. The last few years that I've been in the college scene and had the chance to talk to more and more high school athletes, I'm actually seeing a trend to where I'm interacting with more high school athletes who are choosing to only play rugby. And I guess this is where I kind of put on my athlete performance strength conditioning hat a little bit. One of the big things that a lot of strength coaches and youth development coaches encourage is multi-sport athletes, because it avoids or minimizes overuse injuries and helps develop multiple skills within the athlete. And so a question that I posed is, are we in the rugby community, are we potentially kind of hurting ourselves 10 to 15 years down the road because we're getting more and more athletes who only play rugby?
Interesting.
Are we going to miss out on that same individual developing better kicking skills through soccer, better contact skills through wrestling or martial arts or whatever? It's hard to say where I see it going, because I know that even right now, we still get a good number of multi-sport athletes. The number of high school, and I'm sure you probably see it more than I, juniors and seniors who have been playing football and now their football is done and now they come out to rugby. I think, that's always going to be there.
Right.
But definitely for the kind of rugby specific athletes, that's where I kind of wonder, from a skill development athlete, bigger, broader athlete development perspective, might we see some of those certain skills fall off a little bit because they're not involved in multiple sports?
Yeah, I think there is this idea of, if I'm going to make it, whatever that means, right? Like if I'm going to be an Eagle, if I'm going to play pro now, that's a new thing too. I've had a lot of, well, what's your career goal? And they'll say, I want to be a professional rugby player, and maybe a couple of years ago we would have said, oh, well, I don't know, unless you're going to go overseas or do something. And maybe it's a more viable option now. I've had, parents ask, should he drop football and only do rugby, or should he, or she drop basketball? And I agree with you. I think there's a lot of those skills that transfer over, and it's different. Like I like the idea of players that do other sports. Now, the only time I've ever encouraged students to maybe drop one is purely if they've been playing these sports and it's for their resume. They're like, oh, well, but I don't want it to look bad for college. I'll say, look, if I don't want you to drop it because you think it'll make you a better rugby player, but it's okay to drop something if it's going to give you more time for sleep, for your studies, things like that. So I've had students maybe doing too many sports, and this is like they're doing 4 or 5 and they're overlapping. So they're like football plus rugby plus wrestling plus track and field, and then even hockey or something like that. And now they're running around to like 2 different practices, week to week. I think that probably gets a little excessive. But I would be willing to bet most college coaches are willing to, I don't want to say take a chance, but they love those players that are coming from, traditionally, I think good crossover athletes are coming from soccer, wrestling, football. But I brought this up in a podcast with Snacks, where, my previous sport, I was a cheerleader before I played rugby. And I played volleyball. Those are not classic crossover rugby sports. But there still is, there's some footwork. There is, I'm trying to make a connection with cheerleading, but there really isn't. I can't think of one other than like rhythm, but I'm like, that's not really the same thing. But I think it is great to have students keep doing the things that they love. I think for any family that's like, oh, like in order for him to go play at Indiana, he's got to drop the other sports. Well, that I don't think translates very well. I don't think that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And part of it too kind of comes down to that mental recovery, that we talked about earlier. I mean, take a high school athlete that's been playing only rugby for the last 2 years. They get to college and they're doing the same thing they've been doing for the last 2 years. Well, they're mentally burned out on top of the stress of, oh no, now I have midterms and I've got a group project and I've got papers due and everything else. They lose that enjoyment, that really drew them to the game to begin with.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's, like I said, that's definitely an observation that I've seen. I hope it's not headed too far down that path, that we can, certainly head it off and still kind of, I don't know, I guess it sounds corny, remember our roots a little bit in terms of the multi-sport athletes, and continue to develop those other skills that is still important for rugby.
Right. Well, you kind of in closing, because I know we're kind of nearing the end of our time together, can you share a little bit more about what you do and how you work with individual players, or I don't know if you work with teams, like with your company, Universal Sports Strength and Conditioning, like what are some things you can do, even for a player that isn't local to you, like what would that look like? And if you can explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, I mean, I am working with individuals, with small groups and with teams, mostly kind of on a consulting basis, just kind of helping them out with whether it's, training routines or helping prepare for certain competitions. One of the most exciting things that I've started recently is working with GPS or player tracking.
Oh, I've seen that. That looks super cool.
Yeah. I tell you what, I mean, you want to talk about a big eye opener. You slap one of those on the back of a player and show him, the numbers and the statistics at the end of the game or end of training. And it really helps kind of drive the message of, okay, look, you worked, 10% more than everybody else. You really need to take tomorrow off and get some extra recovery. Or the flip side, hey, you worked 15, 20% less than everybody. We need you to do a little bit more top up. It takes away the kind of personal opinion of, hey, you look unfit. I need you to go do some extra conditioning. The numbers tell it all. And so with that, a player can be in California. I can access all the information. They turn on the unit whenever they go to practice. They turn it off. I can access it and really kind of help guide them throughout the week. So let's say that multi-sport athlete that we were talking about, well, if soccer and rugby overlap, I can text, email, video chat, whatever, have a conversation, say, hey, look, your workload is really increasing this week, significantly more than the weeks prior. So, we really need to find some time that you can, take some time off or get some extra recovery or, make sure that you're sleeping as much as you need to. And that's really kind of where it's been most exciting for me is, through these tours and through the experience with the national team and going to the international tournaments, finding out what that process, what that routine looks like. That's really going to help. I'm not going to say, make the athlete stronger or faster, but help them be in the best shape or the best condition they can for that next performance. I'm still doing some strength and conditioning, writing workout programs, conditioning programs, and those sorts of things. But for me, it's really about helping the individual find the bigger picture. The weight room is only one part of it. As a lot of strength coaches say, I might only see an athlete 2 hours a week. It's what are they doing those other 166 hours a week that can really determine, whether their time in the weight room is good or bad.
Mm.
So yeah, that's kind of, where I've really tried to go. I'm actually chatting to a couple of coaches right now about how can they better structure, their quote unquote conditioning at practice. And that's where it's really awesome, probably concern or confusing for those that I speak with, because I'm a strength conditioning coach, but as you said with IU, I'm the rugby coach. And then, so I kind of get to wear both hats a little bit and understand both sides of the coin.
Right. Well, I think, and in closing, I mean, when I think about strength and conditioning, for those of us who are not, doing this professionally, like you typically see, it's like, I guess you'll run suicides, like I guess you'll run sprints. And I mean, it's not bad, but I think the idea of having, coaches and players talk to someone who really knows this in and out about how do you really increase your performance versus just kind of keep doing the same thing, because that's all is, I guess when I was a freshman, we would run, a 3-mile loop. Like that's what we did. And that was good enough. And then it's that shift of, okay, well, how do we get from good enough to really starting to challenge you if you really have these kind of goals that you want to meet, and being able to talk to someone like you to get specific feedback and say, okay, last week you did this week, because you are, leading up to a tournament, we're going to dial that down, or we're going to do this more, and adjusting instead of like still doing the same thing. So obviously in the kind of little notes part, when I put this up, I'll include all of your information, and people can certainly reach out to you directly. But good luck to you and the team out in Malaysia. We'll be cheering for you, and hopefully we can do this again. It was so nice to see you and catch up.
Yeah, no, you too. And thanks again.
Of course. All right. Bye.
All right. Bye.